You started by saying, we are going to negotiate, which is good, and it's coming from you. But why don't we negotiate first before we come out to take a position? The tax, something that looks attractive, may not necessarily be that. Because if you transfer or you move people from lower income from VAT, and then you increase their taxes, the corporate taxes, the person that is manufacturing that goods will now transfer the VAT cost to it. So it means you gave him with the right hand, and it was taken, or it's taken on the left hand. South. Mr. President, as you said, and as we discussed, reforms is necessary if we have to move forward. Even in our lives, you look at where you are, where you want to be, and how you want to be, so that you get there. I am not against reforms. And I'm not against these reforms, tax reforms. My problem is, number one, the timing. The timing as it is today, when you talk about reforms to Nigerians, whether it's good or bad, they misconceive it. And as we said, I just want to add to what distinguished Senator Sekibo, Sariki Dipo said, Senator Dixon said. He talked eloquently and explained so many things. There are 4 things or 3 there. But, as you said, the time for that would be at the public hearing or when we pass it to the second reading. But let it be on record that my problem with the bills, I've said 1, that is the timing. Number 2, the issue of derivation made the reform contagious, contaminated, and contradictory in some cases, because the Constitution has to be amended in order for some of these proposals to be effective. I'm glad we are doing constitutional review. So even if it means reviewing the Constitution, this is general principles. As you said, or as the senators decided, we should not throw away the baby with the bathwater. I would have preferred we remove the baby and throw away the water first. And that is to go with what the governors and NEC proposed, that this bill should be withdrawn so that, and they are not saying that the bill should be killed. No. You withdraw the bill, work on it, and then submit it to the National Assembly again after getting the buy-in of the governors and NEC, and even our traditional rulers. Mr. President, let's be honest to ourselves. If we sit down here, work on these bills, assuming as it is now, because the governors have not come out publicly to change their position. The traditional rulers have not sat down publicly to change their position. NEC have not sat down to change their position. And for me, as I said, I looked at the bill. The bill contains so many good things, but these 2 things, derivation and VAT, even though you say it will be addressed at the public session, it's not something that many of us will agree to it. You started by saying, we are going to negotiate, which is good, and it's coming from you. But why don't we negotiate first before we come out to take a position? The tax, something that looks attractive, may not necessarily be that. Because if you transfer or you move people from lower income from VAT, and then you increase their taxes, the corporate taxes, the person that is manufacturing that goods will now transfer the VAT cost to it. So it means you gave him with the right hand and it was taken, or it's taken on the left hand. Secondly, the corporate tax you are talking about, when you remove the lower income, which is good, but then in the bill, they say 50 million to billion, 25%. They reduce it from 30% to 25%. If a small person or medium enterprising company makes up to 50 million per year, and you are charging him the same percentage with companies that are earning billions and declaring billions of profit. I give you an example back. So the person that is in Nnewi managing to manufacture shoes and his turnover turns up to be 50 million, you are charging him the same with somebody that is sitting down with pen and paper. Read it, and you see.
Senator Ndume, you have 30 seconds. You have 30 seconds to conclude.
I don't know whether that is fair, Mr. President.
On the general principles of the bills, you have 30 seconds.
So, in conclusion, Mr. President, the third problem I mentioned, if the people, through the governors, and then the NEC and the traditional rulers say that the bill should be withdrawn, make some necessary amendments, and then bring it back, and we can pass it in 24 hours. That is my position, Mr. President.
Noted.
With all due respect to distinguished Senator Ndume, who was my minority leader in the House of Reps, a leader in the Senate, and immediate first chief whip of the Senate with all the cognate experience of lawmaking, I beg to disagree with him that this bill should be withdrawn first and consultation should be held with the Nigerian Governors Forum and traditional rulers. We have a procedure which is clearly and unambiguously stated in our rule book for the process of lawmaking. And the Constitution, in a very clear and unambiguous terms, gave us the powers to regulate our proceedings. Section 60. Section 60. And pursuant to Section 60 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, we gave these rules to ourselves in order to guide our proceedings. And then the process of lawmaking is very clear and unambiguous as per this book, that second reading, it will be now transmitted to the committee for public hearing. In the course of the public hearing, Nigerians of all walks of life, of all groups, will come and aggregate, including the governors and traditional rulers, are free to come and ventilate their opinion.
And Governors Forum.
Yes, that's why, including the Governors Forum and traditional rulers, are free to come and ventilate their opinion as to the pros and the cons of the bill before the public hearing, so that our committee will now look at the various submissions, aggregate it, and then bring it for clause-by-clause consideration. So this procedure that Senator Ndume, with all this due respect, has suggested is foreign to process of legislative exercise, and therefore is purely academic and should be should not be considered.
But not rhetoric.
Not rhetoric. It's an academic exercise, not worthy of legislative consideration.
Okay.
It's an academic exercise not worthy of legislative consideration. So, Mr. President, having said that, my contribution on the general principles of the bill is that this bill, as it is proposed, I am particularly on the issue of reducing the tax burden on Nigerians, removing VAT on food, medicals, education, pharmaceuticals, and electricity were exempted from VAT. So this bill is noble, it's pro-people, because it's trying to reduce the tax burden on Nigerians, so that it is the big earners that are going to be taxed for the purpose of. Then with regard to the issue of payee, people that are not earning more than the minimum wage are also exempted from pay-as-you-earn tax. This will also go a long way in reducing the tax burden on Nigerians. And then with regard to the issue of company income tax that was reduced from 30 to 25%, it's equally good, because that will give an opportunity for the companies to employ more Nigerians and what have you. So on that general principle, Mr. President, distinguished senators, I support that this bill should go for second reading.
Distinguished
President, distinguished colleagues, I rise to second this motion on the lead debate on the Nigeria tax reforms bills and the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, we have since yesterday exhaustively examined all the aspects of this tax reform bill. And in line with our legislative procedure in making laws, agreed earlier today that these bills be passed for a second reading, so that when it is referred to the appropriate committee, especially at the third reading, all the gray areas and areas of concern by Nigerians and some concerned citizens should be addressed appropriately at that level. And I think at this point that I will urge all my colleagues to support the second reading of this bill, so that we pass it to the relevant committees, having exhaustively debated on this matter earlier on today. I so submit, Mr. President.
This bill, I believe, is coming at a time when Nigeria is trying to reform its economy so that we meet the standards that other advanced economies have reached. As a committee which I chair, that's Finance Committee, I know we are going to be reposed with responsibilities. And our responsibilities, we are going to do it and to discharge it to the best interest of Nigerians. What these bills entails is good for this country. And anywhere we see it necessary, and if it's necessary, to do the needful in terms of giving Nigeria a legislation that will carry every sector of this country, we will do it. We will give these bills all the necessary legislative processes it requires, such as public hearing. We'll call for memoranda from all sectors. The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, regional groupings, we will call for memoranda. And then at the end of the day, we will do a retreat with experts, tax experts and consultants, so that we will be able to give this bill the real legislative procedure in passing it. So I believe that our distinguished colleagues will give this bill the necessary support to pass the second reading. Thank you, Mr. President.
Distinguished Senator.
Tax reform in our country. We don't have an economy that is taxation-based and taxation-driven. It's an economy that is sometimes difficult to track, sometimes difficult to predict, and that's not the best for us. In our system, if you look at the tax ratio, even in African countries, our tax reliance is just about 7% or even less, 7% of our population. Compared to the GDP, the tax to GDP ratio, this country is one of the least. And that doesn't speak to progress, it speaks to stagnation and backwardness. Even the African ratio is 15%
tax to GDP. And it's understandable because the founding fathers of this country based economies, pre-independence, on taxation. Even taxing cattle, they called it jangali in the north. And people were paying. They could plan the economies. And that was when they did major things in all regions. But all of that changed, Mr. President. The moment oil was discovered in the creeks of the Niger Delta, 1957-58, Nigeria found free money in the creeks of the Niger Delta, and we left taxation, just as we left agriculture and manufacturing. So that's where we are. So the attempt by the current administration to let the governments of Nigeria, all levels, they run on tax and tax revenue, is something that I fully support. I am aware that some issues have been raised, and that is legitimate. We're a country of diverse people, diverse cultures, diverse expectations, and that's the beauty and the greatness of Nigeria. We cannot expect to be a country that speaks with one voice or sees things only from one perspective. All those are legitimate observations and fears and expectations. All we're expected to do is to harness all of this and enact laws in the national interest, which I believe, following our rules, after the second reading, at the committee stage, when the public hearing is held, everybody who has anything to say will be invited to say, as the chairman of the committee has said. Now, there are issues I am concerned with. Some of these issues that have been raised are also as a result of insufficient consensus building and consultation prior to the introduction. And it's understandable, as a former governor, why some governors express concern at the neck. That is legitimate. That consultation should have taken place. And I believe between now and at the end of our legislative activities, more consultations will happen. But that does not detract from the essence of the legislations that have been sent to us. For example, there is emphasis on derivation according to taxation. And the attempt now is to encourage states to be productive. And why not? A situation where states will abandon their core responsibility to create an enabling environment, attract investment, promote economic activities, so that that state can boost its revenues. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I am concerned from where I come from the experiences you and I have, where oil workers are flown into oil platforms in Akwa Ibom, in Eket and Ibono, in Akwa Ibom, or flown into Bonny and other areas in River State, or flown into Brass in Bayelsa, and in southern Niger area, and in Delta State in Ogola and Foropa, Ogola and Fokadus. We're interested that this is an opportunity for the payee taxes from those oil workers to be calculated and paid to the oil-producing states where those activities are generated, as against being calculated and paid to where the head office is located, as has been the case, where the tax is registered. And from the general principles underlying this bill, as I explained yesterday, there is a move and a commitment by the executive to address that issue of revenue derivation. to ensure that payee taxes, even for the oil workers that are flown in and flown out every day at the end of work or 2 days, be calculated and paid. If that is done, I think that is a good move that should be supported. The other area in VAT, according to derivation, when we get to the committee stage, we'll look at the specific details. But there's nothing wrong in saying that the telephone calls that are made in Bayelsa or Akwa Ibom or Sokoto or Kano, the VAT on those things that are consumed be calculated and paid to those states. And we are told that that is the essence of these bills. And there's nothing wrong about it. Because VAT is a consumption tax. It's not a production tax. Those who are in the states who consume services, the VAT accruing to those should be calculated and paid to it. I'm sure when we look at the details, we'll see whether there's enough mechanism to guarantee transparency and accuracy in terms of administration. Those are some of the things we'll fine-tune. So, Mr. President, this is a good move, and there is an effort also to reduce the burden of taxation on Nigerians. Corporate taxes by the proposal. If you read the bills, there's a proposal to reduce corporate taxes from next year, reducing it from the 30% that it is currently to 25%. So that is a good move. And there's also a move to remove the people at the lowest level in terms of their salaries and so on, to exempt them completely from taxation. These are good things in this bill that should be encouraged. Mr. President, it is for these and other reasons, and principally, as a federalist, which I've been all my adult life, I see these bills as a move towards entrenching fiscal federalism in Nigeria, which I fully support. So, Mr. President, I use this opportunity to call on all my colleagues to agree that these bills, all 4 of them, should be passed for second reading to enable our committee and the experts and the general public engage in accordance with our rules. Thank you.
No, please sit down. If you are traveling from Lagos to Akwa Ibom, all the local government people, the tax collectors will run from the bush and block your car. And then they will ask you whether you have tire permit, whether you have exhaust permit, and they will mention that this is Onyangwe local government of Edo. As soon as you pass there, you get towards Onitsha, they will block you again and ask you for the same thing. And then you will show them, they will say, no, that one you paid for Edo, we are talking about Anambra. You move from there, you get to Ihiala. They will say, stop. What of the one for Abia? So multiplicity. In fact, it frightens you to move on the road in Nigeria because of local government taxes. And if you don't have money in your pocket, your car will be kept there for at least 10 hours. So if the bills or any section will also address these issues of multiplicity of taxes, I think it's something that we should all look at. And I also want to remind us that we are discussing the general principles of the bills. The specifics will be looked into whenever we go for the public hearing. We'll get the experts, we'll get the traditional institution, we'll get our governors and all other stakeholders concerned to make their inputs. We will not pass anything here that will not be in the best interest of Nigerians. We believe strongly that what is good for Nigeria is what we will do. And we should at this stage even say, let's go for the second reading so that we can subject it to legislative processes. Who do I call so that, I won't put any question until I hear from Senator Ndume. These bills be allowed to go for the second reading. Those in support say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. These bills are now referred to the Committee on Finance to revert to the Senate in 6 weeks. The Chairman Finance, the bills will go now into second reading. Before the clerk does so, I want you to note what your colleagues have said, that all the concerned groups in the country must be invited to the public hearing. The Governors Forum, the traditional institution, the CSOs, the NGOs, and all concerned Nigerians, so that at the end, before it comes back here, for us to do further consideration clause by clause, Nigerians would have had the opportunity of making input and then deleting some sections, including some, reducing some of the provisions and adding some, and then at the end you bring them back for our consideration. So the Clerk of the Senate.